Anthony and Stacy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's really an honor. Well, listen, it's not too often I get to have a conversation between a counselor and a client, so I'm really looking forward to a deep dive with you both today. Here's where I want to start. Take us inside the backstory of how you two met and then began to work together in a counselor-client relationship.
Well, I was in a place in my life where I was just overwhelmed, and I was kind of desperate for help, and I was desperate for help outside of a church setting, and I will tell you why, because I know some people just went, oh my gosh, what does he mean by that? It means that no matter what church I went to, any therapist that was connected to a church knows my family. So there was no clean slate for me anywhere to be found. So I was like, I had to question in that moment, how do I do this? Because all I know is church therapy, that's it. And I was like, I have to find a therapist who obviously is a person of faith, but outside of the circle enough to where they're not going to come in thinking about, oh, this is Tony Evans' kid or Priscilla Shia's brother or Crystal. Like, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
So I was just desperate in that place, was watching TV. Stacy's a media personality who's always on some show. And I saw her answering a question and I thought, this is going to be a far stretch, but I'm going to wait for these credits to roll and see who that was. And long story short, looked at the credits, emailed Stacy's team. They made sure that I wasn't a crazy person, because that's what crazy people do, is like, look at the credits and let's email somebody, And then her team vetted. She had an opening, and that was the start of this relationship. I didn't know. I was just going to go test it out the first time and see if it was a fit, and it was a fit 6 years ago.
Stacy, do you want to add anything to that in terms of how the relationship was forged?
Right. So that is true. And what's pretty amazing is I'm really busy because I have a media career, I'm a college professor, and I also have a pretty full practice. So it was sort of one of those things that Anthony and I now call divine intervention. Mm-hmm. The thing I do want to share with everybody who is listening to us talk today is, to your point earlier, it is pretty unusual to be having a conversation with a therapist and a client. And that's because we have a completely confidential relationship. So any of you all, if you go to counseling, it is supposed to be confidential, with the exception of a few things that are like safety related issues, like harm to self and others and child abuse, things like that. But Anthony actually has waived his confidentiality so that I can sit and have this conversation with y'all. And, but what you will discover is that he will share most of the details of his story. Anything that I say, he's given me permission to share. But yes, we have been working together for 6 years, on and off. And I'm really excited that we have this book together and that we're all having this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have. And Anthony, I wanted to drill down into your story just in a moment. But what I find really interesting, and maybe Stacy, I'll go back to you for this one. What's interesting is that I have perceived both a hesitation from people to pursue therapy from the get-go, but also, and maybe the pandemic contributed to this uptick of millennials and Gen Z in particular, headed toward utilizing therapy. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on both ends of the spectrum, both the hesitation and also this uptick to say, I need help.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are hesitant because of either where they came from and, what their background is. Or I think a lot of people don't really understand what therapy is. I mean, you don't really know until you experience it or until you read our book or hear us talk about it. And I think a lot of people are worried that they're going to be judged. They feel like they're airing their dirty laundry. They are worried they're going to be like analyzed or, some mystical thing that's going to happen. And it's not so much that. It's really just a regular conversation with a person who's been trained to understand what it's like to walk in your shoes and to give you practical tools to help you walk in those shoes if you're stumbling. And in reference to, it's funny that you brought up this sort of millennial Gen Z thing. I have given more therapy referrals to people I know who are in that age range. I really think that age group was really hit by the pandemic pretty badly. They're all trying to launch their careers or go to school, and getting frozen out of all that stuff, I think, was really hard. But I'm also really hopeful that group is looking at life this way, because I think it's good for everyone to have somebody that's objective that they can have a conversation with. And I'm glad to see that people are willing to reach out for support when they need it.
That's good. Anthony, let's drill down into your end of the story, specifically what was happening in your life. What led to, as you put it, a downward spiral into depression and anxiety?
I think the way I surmise it is I was playing injured. I always say this as it relates to like an athlete with a sprained ankle who tries to tape it up and get on the court. Eventually, that doesn't work. You cannot play injured for a period, for one game, much less game after game after game. And for me, it was event after event after event, plane ride to here, plane ride to there, ministry opportunity. I was taping up my ankle. And what preachers' kids are good at specifically is playing and making everybody think everything's okay, like disguising the limp. If you have a limp, disguising it ultimately makes it hurt worse. And that's what was happening. I had emotional limps, spiritual limps, relational limps that I was taping up to get on the field and sing at whatever event or on whatever tour. And that creates a spiral. That created my spiral. And going back to what Stacey said about waiving confidentiality, I thought it was very important to waive that and have these conversations, because I wish that there was somebody of faith talking like this to me when I was 16, 17, 19, to all these years. I wish somebody would have said, hey, here's something that helped me beyond, for those of us who can't just read a Bible verse and be okay. And I'm cautious when I talk in these interviews, because people that I know the church stigma on therapy. It's like, when I talked to my dad about this, the book is called When Faith Meets Therapy. You would have thought when I first said it to him, he looked at me like I said, when faith meets sorcery. Like it was like, Dad, that's not, I mean, what is wrong with you? It's not that. I was just at a place where figuring it out on my own was very hard. I cannot figure it out. And my dad is this beast theologian. And sometimes it was very hard for me. I've had a lot of coffee, so I'm talking a lot and
You're
fast.
great. You're great, Anthony. Keep going.
I always liken it to my dad. If Thomas Edison was teaching a class and talking about a light bulb, and I'm Thomas Edison Jr. sitting in the class, that's pressure enough. It feels horrible when you don't even understand how to implement what your dad's talking about, and you have his name and you're in the class and everybody's looking at you like, why don't you know this better than us? That kind of thing created me feeling dumb, for lack of a better way to say it. And I had to admit to myself, in the same way I needed tutoring in high school in math class, that Stacey is a tutor. I don't necessarily understand. I can't work out what's in this book of truths, these equations. It stresses me out. And instead of being hard on myself, I got a tutor to help me work those truths out in my life. And that's where I was and what happened and how I ended up landing.
I really believe in therapy 100%. I'm the son of two professional counselors myself, and I really believe in its effectiveness. And to be very candid with you both, the responsibility that we have to bring assistance along for our journey. Now, I want to talk about this, because we are spirit, soul, body. And I think this is where a lot of the self-help industry misses in this conversation. They make it too reductionistic, too one-dimensional. But realizing that we are spirit, soul, body, Anthony, talk about what happened to your mind and body when you stuffed your pain. What did it feel like? What happened neurophysiologically? But what I'm really interested in talking about with you, Anthony, especially because of your upbringing, I mean, my word, I've been knowing about your dad and reading his stuff since I was a kid. So I'm familiar with the way you grew up, and obviously maybe some of the implicit pressure in that. Okay.
Yeah.
But what I especially want to talk about with you is what happened to your spirit. And here's the reason why. Scripture talks about the broken spirit and how it affects us in the other two domains of life. What happened in that way?
Yeah, well, what happened is that it started to come out everywhere. The fact that I was stuffing things down, you said stuffing things down, it doesn't disappear. Like it doesn't disseminate into nothing. When you stuff it down, you're putting it somewhere, and it needs to come out. There were things that I've stuffed down. I mean, to be honest, Stacey will catch at this point now. Emotions will pass through my eyes while we're talking because there's been so long, and she'll be like, "Wait, what was that?" And the whole objective is acknowledge these emotions, because stuffing them down, they will come out somewhere. There was a period where my spirit was just I was about to say dark, but it wasn't dark in a demonic way, but it was just dark and heavy. And because I thought, stuff it down, keep moving, stuff it down. Nobody taught me how to do that except for church taught me how to do that. And that's a very damaging dynamic. Nobody was saying stuff it down, but the culture was creating we are disingenuine. That was the culture of a lot of what I was in. And that disingenuine culture communicates stuff it down, which is the antithesis of being healthy and whole. That's the antithesis of handing over your issues to God. Like, that's literally the opposite of what he's like. If his burden is easy and his yoke is light, stuffing it down does the opposite of that. It literally creates the opposite. So it's like, as it relates to my mind and my spirit, it was just heavy because I was stuffing it down. And Stacey has helped me with the art of getting that stuff out. The other day, I cried some tears during a session, and Stacey said to me, "Those are old tears that you never let out." And she was right. That was the 13-year-old crying in that moment, because it stays with you. I'm obviously no longer 13. That stuff stays with you and it becomes heavy.
Well, Anthony, I think you touched on a really important point. And Stacey, I'd love for you to jump into this from a therapeutic perspective and even talk to us about the neurophysiology of this. But I'd like to propose that everything in life either comes from fear or from love. And so in an environment where we are motivated to stuff our emotions because we think a person of faith has got to be stronger than this, we're actually being motivated out of a false identity from a spirit of fear that does not trust and does not abide in perfect love. Stacey, your thoughts?
Right.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, look, I always say children learn what they live. And so whatever we're raised to have is very much a piece of who we are. However, we also interpret things. So if we feel like there is some kind of a message that says, stuff all your feelings, then we're going to stuff our feelings. It's been interesting. I think if we all went to our parents and said, "Are you telling me to brush everything under the rug?" They would say, "Absolutely not." And yet we all have like giant rugs with stuff brushed under them. And so I believe that part of my sort of mission in life is to like peek under the rug and say like, okay, what's under there? Let's talk about it. Let's get it out. Because here's the truth. You cannot change what you cannot see. And so if you're not willing to take a look at it, you're not going to be able to fix it.
You cannot change what you cannot see. Folks, I want you to think about that for a moment, because many of you are facing circumstances in life that you said, this wasn't my fault. Why am I here? And Stacey, I want to flip that a little bit, and maybe Anthony, you could speak to this from the client side of things. Not only can we not fix what we can't see, we will not change that which we will not confront. So, Anthony, speaking to this, on the client side of things, I believe one of the most empowering moves we can make is to take full responsibility for our lives. So, again, folks, you're listening right now, facing daunting circumstances, or now you're living through the reality of what happened in your past. What happened might not have been our fault, but our lives are our responsibilities. Anthony, take us inside the hardest season of your life, specifically when you lost 8 family members in a short time. Add to that other crises. Like, what did taking responsibility for your life entail? And then, Stacey, I'd love to hear some of your feedback about how Anthony processed that.
Well, in the case of me losing 8 family members at one time, I had to own those feelings and the grief and that was, I don't necessarily want to own that, but there were moments for instance, that was awful. First of all, it's horrible. It's horrible losing one family member. 8 back to back, and it landing with your mom is the worst scenario ever. And actually landing with your mom and then a pandemic 2 months later, it was like, I don't understand what's going on right now. I literally was just lost as to what was going on. But in that moment, what I did not want to do was take what a friend of mine calls a spiritual bypass. Some people can do that. Some people can just go, God says everything works together for good. And just all of a sudden you go from losing your mom to I'm fine. I'm not that at all. I am not that at all. And I think I've tried to be that because I think my dad is more like that. I'm not saying he doesn't grieve, but he can go quick to what God says about the matter and he can get there fast. I had to sit in my feelings. Stacy at some points would say, go to the roof of your house, which in LA people have roofs. She didn't mean go sit on the, the roof, but she go to the roof of your house, take a picture of your mother, go when the sun is setting because she loves sunsets, and let the feelings come, because this is an important pivotal moment. And if you try to stuff all this down, it's going to become a problem. And for me, what happens when I stuff down feelings is they turn into anger, because that's like the easy emotion. That's the tough looking emotion. And I become a horrible person to deal with, like not fun to be around. And then I'm going and singing worship songs on the weekend. I was like, I don't want to be that guy, because I've been that guy before. So that's what it looked like, owning it in this case. Stacy, I don't know if you want to add to the stuff you told me in that season.
No, that's exactly what I said, and that's exactly what I guided, and you listened. Grief is hard, and I think all of us want to push it away. I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone said, can't I just pray this away and not feel pain anymore? I don't know. I probably could, buy something pretty nice. And I think grief is hard because it lives inside of our body too. Anyone who's ever felt grief, it's like heaviness in your chest. Mm-hmm. And there are people who can pray or say to themselves, this is how it was supposed to be, how we wanted it to be, and feel okay. But for those of us that can't, we need to release the heaviness from our bodies. And that is what Anthony was describing to me. And that's why I said, you need to go up on the rooftop where he has actual chairs and everything, because that's what they have in LA. Sit in one of those chairs and let yourself have your feelings. Because to your point, you were talking about taking responsibility for feelings. And one of the ways to take responsibility is to ask yourself, what am I feeling? And to process through those feelings in a healthy and productive way. And so when it comes to grief, it's typically about crying. But just side note, because I like to give tips out, for some people it isn't about crying. For some people it's how do I carry on their legacy? How am I like them? What can I eat today that, my mother enjoyed that gives me warm feelings about, food that she loves to eat? Or what can I cook that she used to cook? I know Anthony on social media the other day, your sisters put up, what was it? Like a pot pie?
Well, they were making that, but my mom's pumpkin bread. They were just cooking my mom's recipes. Like that was their way of feeling it and not avoiding it. Yeah.
Stacy, for you, I read in the book, when you cut onions, that reminded you of your grandmother. Now, what I hear both of you saying is this: if we were to distill a principle down for those watching us or listening to us, and it's this: we have to learn how to find meaning in our grief and through the process of mourning. David Kessler, who famously wrote a book, Finding Meaning, really talked about the power in finding meaning. Now, folks, listen. If you're experiencing grief, finding meaning, and Stacy, you can validate this. This is not about getting the answer to why. This is about moving forward. So, anything else we should know, Stacy or Anthony, about what it takes, what's required of us to find meaning, to move forward, which in my mind is so very different than moving on. When I lost my mom a few years ago to cancer, the platitudes came out like, Anthony, you probably experienced yourself. And what I realized in my own process of mourning was this: I never have to move on from this, but if I want to live a life of transformation and wholeness, I do have to move forward. That involved finding meaning. So I'd love to hear, if we could even stay on grief for a moment more. Anthony, what did finding meaning look like for you? And Stacy, as a therapist, how would you coach all of us to find meaning in our place of grief?
Well, for me, finding meaning as related just specifically to the loss of my mom has been my parents' legacy in general. They have worked so hard. I mean, I've watched them dedicate their whole life to the ministry that's there in Dallas and the global ministry and all that stuff. So now I find things, and my dad is like, you have the eyes of your mom. Like I will walk into a room that's, whether they're about to film something or whether my dad's getting ready and I will start moving and putting things the way that she would want them. And that to me is the way that I have found, one of the ways that I have found meaning. That's just one of the simple ways that I found meaning. I will go into the house, which is still the house that my parents still live at, the house that I grew up in, and I will make sure the house looks the way my mom wants the house to look. still. Like those are small things, but they're not small at all when it comes to finding meaning. And then purpose as related to me. Like when I'm on stage singing, I will think about her, reminding me that she would always say the special thing about your voice is your tone. You don't have to do what everybody else has to do. And so when I sing, I think about my mom. When I start to try to kind of go into other directions, and I'll be like, it's your tone. Just do that. Like just so many different things that she said. It's kind of like now I want to do everything my mom said, which
I do.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Stacey, what would you add to that?
Well, I always say that grief doesn't really go away. We just grow around the grief.
Well said.
And it is very much about, like I had mentioned earlier, looking at the legacy. And Anthony, I think your descriptions are great too. It's also about what are their wishes for me, so you can continue to carry them with you. So I have a client whose mother passed away shortly before she got married. And I said to her, which is awful, obviously. And I said, well, how would your mother have liked you to be on the wedding? Like, how can you bring her there? What would she have wanted you to say? Would she have wanted you to speak about her? Like, and you can carry her through when you have children, because she's going to have kids. You can ask yourself, what messages would my mother have wanted to impart upon me? Because particularly for people who we're grieving, who we've been close to, you do have a sense of, like Anthony's describing, that you know what your mother would be saying. And that is a way to create some meaning. I think the other piece of it is, we do what we can in times of pain. And it's important to do what you can. Anthony has a line that he says all the time to me. We quote each other, which is, I'll let you say it.
It's do what you can, and God will do what you can't. That's the bottom line. And I heard that at a Joyce Meyer conference. I don't know how many years ago. I was singing at it, thinking I'll just sing, and she said that line, and I stopped and was like, "That is what it is." Because I always wouldn't do anything if I couldn't do everything.
That's really interesting, and I was actually going to play the cynic side for a minute, because maybe there's someone listening today who said, "I'm sick of like the Christianese. I know I've heard that before, but put some legs on that." How do we navigate that statement, Anthony, without, number one, it turning into a platitude, but number two, us just kind of putting the angel wings on life? What does it mean again to do everything within our wherewithal to pursue transformation and healing?
I think it looks different depending on who you are. But what I liken it to is when I was playing Little League Baseball and I could not make contact, I could not make impact with the ball. I remember having the hardest time. I was so frustrated because I could not make impact with the ball. And then my dad walked out to home base and wrapped his arms around me and grabbed the bat with me. Now, I didn't walk off and stop swinging because my dad was there. When he put his arms around me and grabbed that bat, and I was trying to swing so hard, and he helped me swing, the impact was exponential. Like not only was I impacting the ball, I was hitting the ball over the fence because my dad came and wrapped his arms and grabbed my circumstance with me. So whatever that thing is in your life where you're trying to work on you or family or whatever, it's like, I think God sees our effort and does what my dad did at home base and comes around and grabs whatever that circumstance is. And he's done that with therapy. I was watching TV. You mentioned cynics.
Is that right?
Like, that's me. So, yeah. So the person listening that's like rolling their eyes, I'm like, that's me. So that was me. So I watched him look at my effort to find a therapist. I mean, he was watching TV, and then what he did to that. There's a book out now because of that initial effort. Like that's more than I was trying to do. You know what I mean? So God, I look at that's one way that I did what I could, and he did more, made the impact.
Stacey, I want to go to you, Stacey, because Anthony, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's obvious to me that as a client, you are ready to put in the work. My dad says this about his clients. He's like, I want to work with people who are ready to just do the work and show up. What are a few expectations, Stacey, expectations and desires that maybe most therapists have for their clients? Because I think this is important for all of us to recognize, especially if we want to pursue real transformation.
I mean, I always say that we are not supposed to be running an agenda. And we're not, in that it is your life, right? We're with you for a 50-minute block of time once a week or twice a week or every other week. But I suppose, you were saying about your father saying that he loves people who are ready to grow. I feel the same way. Most therapists, the good ones anyway, because I always say there's bad people in every profession, the good ones are compassionate, caring people who don't like to watch someone suffer. And so when I sit in a room with someone, I'm wanting them to put in the work to help relieve their suffering. And I'm going to pull out any tool I have in my toolbox to also help them relieve their suffering. And then I think there's a second piece, which is relieve your suffering and then live the best life that you possibly could live. There's a lot of people who show up in my office who they're actually fine, but other people in their life are the ones that are difficult. And so a lot of times I'm giving practical tools on how do you deal with another person so that you can be, happier and filled with greater peace. Because God knows, you can pray all you want, but sometimes people do what people do. And sometimes they're even family members.
Stacey, how do we, and I want to just kind of shift the conversation a little bit, and Anthony, I'd love your real-time, ear-to-the-ground experience with this. How do we leave survival mode? It's incredibly stressful to the mind and to the body, especially when we've walked through trauma and loss, but it can, in a dysfunctional way, be really comfortable. I'd love to hear from both of you.
You think you're saying survival mode can be comfortable?
Yeah, we normalize dysfunction. We normalize living in a fear, fight, flight activated mode.
Right. It just stays there. Well, for me, and I'll let Stacey speak to this more, but for me, I left survival mode when I found a safe place to not be looking over my shoulder at what may be coming my way. And for me, Stacey in psychotherapy was that safe place where I left that whole gazelle in the wild and thinking a lion's coming, the energy. I left that energy because now I was in a space where confidentiality and training put me in a safe, confined area.
Stacey, how do we do it? You're all of our counselor for just a moment. How do we leave survival mode neurobiologically?
Well, I'm actually really glad that you brought this up, because I think the pandemic put us all in survival mode, especially early on, when we were locked down. We didn't know if a bunch of us, people were dying, all the questions of what's real, what's not real, and everyone's in a heightened state. And one of the things that, from a physiological perspective that's also psychological, is when you are in constant state of hypervigilance, when you're in fight or flight, when you're in survival mode, what's happening is all of the stress hormones that are in our body are shooting out at us. It's almost like if you picture a spray going all the time. And what starts to happen is that spray starts to wipe us out. If you can imagine being on all the time in this spraying kind of a way. And so we grow tired, which ultimately lowers our immune system, can lead to depression and anxiety, can lead to lack of sleep, makes us less productive at work, makes us more cranky in our relationships. And so the domino effect of that is really, really significant. And so some of the tips that I talk about is, first and foremost, you have to be in touch with what is going on inside of you. You need to know, what are you feeling? What's going on? So you can start to work on that. Secondly, we're all busy living life, but it's really important, amazingly important, that we all practice self-care. Self-care has to do with eating right, exercising, getting a good night's rest, doing stress relieving activities, which include things like exercise. I tell people to go look at a body of water, walk around in nature. Those kinds of things are all really important things that we should be doing all the time. And then I would say my last tip about survival mode is, survival mode has you actively fighting in the present. And so we want to also look forward and say, who do I want to be? What do I want my relationships to look like? What do I want my life to look like? And then start taking even small steps to work towards the goals of the life that we ultimately want to live.
if we can just kind of keep going down this road, I really appreciate both of your perspectives on this, because I'm curious then, Stacey, how do we heal from emotional addiction? And Anthony, jump in here as you wish as well. Like when we grow up in a chaotic home environment and that level of dysfunction becomes our normal state of being, there's sort of this innate addiction to heightened emotional states of being. How do we heal from that? Same thing?
Yeah, I can go first on that one. And you had also mentioned earlier this whole shoot, I just lost my train of thought give me a second. You said, it becomes, so what happens is when you have had any kind of a challenging traumatic experience, it could be, growing up in a household, it could be being bullied at some point in your life, it could be the pandemic, it could be anything that's stressful and traumatic. When that has happened, those feelings become familiar. And we think that familiarity is comfortable, but it's actually uncomfortable. It's just familiar. It would be like cuddling up with some tin foil if that's what you've always had as a blanket, and not even realizing that you actually want something like fuzzy and warm and cuddly. And so it's about recognizing that this is familiar and it's not comfortable. And what has been normal for us isn't necessarily right. And getting to know yourself, knowing who you are, how you work, I keep saying this over and over again, and thinking about the life you want to live and who you want to be, those are all the kinds of things that will push you out of familiarity into actual true comfort.
Yeah, I'm not going to add much to that because she's the one who has worked with me through the process of that. There have been relational scenarios that I've gotten into that are dysfunctional, and because that in certain other circumstances when you were younger, that was normal. And so you are looking for what is normal, and that's not good for you. It is all, you know what I mean? That all I had was French fries. So now I just want French fries all the time. And I'm not realizing what it's doing to the arteries around my heart, because that's all, I'm not realizing what it's doing to my heart. And I think a lot of times we go, what Stacey said, scenarios that are familiar, and we do not realize what it's doing to our heart.
People's behavior is often how they feel about themselves. Both of you agree or disagree?
I think it's how much they value themselves. Yes. So yes, I do agree with that.
I agree, and I would just add, people's behavior is also impacted by what other people say and do, because so many of us are other directed. I mean, people of faith are taught to serve, which is a wonderful quality, but oftentimes those people who are the most willing to serve and who are compassionate, kind individuals are also the people who aren't thinking about what they want and need, and so they're adjusting who they are for every scenario they're in, ultimately hurting themselves. And we talk a lot about this in the book because it drives both of us crazy.
No, that's good.
Drives the therapist crazy.
Yeah. And just so you know, this book is done in a format where at the end of every chapter, you are giving practical tips to work it out. It's not just like stories and anecdotes and maybe you should try this. It's like, here are the practical tips. Like, here's step 1, step 2, just to get you started in that direction. And so I needed a book like that. I needed okay, so what do I do now? That was a nice story, but what's up? Give me practical tools. And that's what this is, going in that direction. And Stacey just mentioned people of faith being compassionate and pouring themselves out and serving and whatever that is. And I believe that, obviously, but she taught me the art of not becoming a victim to my own compassion, which is I would cross a line and start victimizing myself in the name of compassion. And that was the problem.
How so, Anthony? I've never heard anything like that. A victim of your own compassion. What does that mean?
No boundaries, not guarding my heart, forgiving a million times, but not understanding that it's forgive, not forgive, and then put yourself back in the situation because you think that you're their savior. There are these lines that I was not drawing because and it wasn't because of my faith, but kind of. It's because of turn the other cheek.
I think it's like training. You got trained to be so other focused that other people were focusing on them and you were focusing on them and that no one is focusing on you. And yes. I think that happens to a lot of us.
Yes. It does. So that was one of the ways. Just a boundaryless heart.
Any strength, folks, overextended becomes a liability. My ability to be empathetic and compassionate, overextended, under stress, and in a dysfunctional environment becomes people-pleasing, enabling, rescuing. Right, Stacey?
Yeah.
Yes, and ultimately toxic for yourself. And then other people end up having collateral damage because you've wiped yourself out. So now some of the people who you really want to be present and connected to are getting less of you because you've been depleted and worn out and overstretched.
Let's just stay here on boundaries for a moment. Stacey, as Anthony's therapist, how would you reinforce his need for boundaries through your sessions?
What I would do is we would spend time looking at where are the holes in the boundaries, and then what are some practical tips to repair them based on individual people and scenarios.
It's very, very situational. That was I love that answer. It's very rare that people say, Stacey, as related to Anthony, what is going on? Because it's that whole client and therapist thing. But yeah, I literally will walk in, paint a scenario of what's happening, and we will establish boundaries for that specific situation. That's why I think therapy is so important. For somebody to dive in who's trained into your circumstance and go, this is as related to this is what we need to do. I'm Mr. Analogy because I can't think of other ways to talk to people. But I was playing tennis with a friend of mine, and he had a coach. And literally, we were playing, and the coach was telling me little adjustments, like, turn your wrist down, face the racket this way, take these steps. And so I was playing, and my swing got better as I was playing. I viewed that's what Stacey does. She's watching from the sidelines while I'm doing life and saying, adjust that just a little bit. And then I hit it perfect, like, because all it took was an adjustment like this, but it's very situational and circumstantial.
That's so helpful. wintoday.tv/episode 306, the book When Faith Meets Therapy, Anthony Evans, Stacey Kaiser. You guys, this has just been so helpful, and I want to land here, Anthony. What did you learn about grief that you didn't know about grief prior to experiencing it?
You have to feel it to heal it. You have to, it's kind of back to what I was talking about earlier. You have to actually go through the process of feeling whatever is coming and the emotions that come with grief. And I also have learned you have to sit in those feelings. And that sounds awful and horrible, but in order to really return to a space of joy, I had to deal with it that way. And then also that sitting in those feelings helped me grow. And so sometimes I've seen like an illustration of grief, and people think the grief gets smaller, but actually you get bigger around it. And that's what I've realized is that the loss of my mom will always be there, but the strength, the emotional strength that's come and perspective that has happened as it relates to me changing the way I view it, that has helped me to grow around the grief. So that's been the most beneficial thing and the greatest thing that I've learned.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, thank you. Stacey, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, that's exactly what I would have said. So I just multiply it times 2.
It's so good. Both of you, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been just a really practical conversation, and I hope folks you're listening right now saying, wow, I've been on the fence thinking about therapy, or I'm intimidated by it, or I've had a bad experience with it. Stacey, I'll land here with you then. How do we pick a good therapist? Someone that's going to really cause us to move forward and not just validate and then allow us to stay where we are.
Right. Well, the ideal way to pick a good therapist is to talk to a trusted person to do that. So it could be somebody in your spiritual life. It could be a medical professional. Doctors have recommendations to therapists. It could be through a friend or other trusted person. But there's another element, which is, I always say you need to pick a therapist like you'd pick a best friend. It needs to feel like someone that you can connect with, that you can open up to, and someone that you trust. And so if you walk into someone's office or hop on Zoom, because a lot of therapists are doing it virtually now, and you don't feel comfortable, safe, connected, then you should go find another therapist. There are lots of us out there.
That's super helpful. You both, anything else before we land? Anything else we haven't covered or said for those watching us or listening to us that they need to hear? And maybe I'll phrase it this way. Coming out of this conversation, what do people need to know and what do they need to do?
Oh my gosh, there is a lot of things we didn't cover. There are so many. There's chapter after chapter. Every chapter is different subject matter. But again, I just want to rephrase the taking that first initial step that will light up the other steps. That initial step will continue to light up what is next. And as you progress, and even though you're fearful and questioning everything, as you progress, your feelings will follow your feet. Your feelings will follow you. They will.
I would say that it's really important to know that if you are not mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually doing well, it will impair other areas of your life. And so we all want to assess ourselves on all four of those levels on a regular basis and make sure that everything's humming along, just like as if you'd service a car, right? You want to make sure everything's humming along so that the road to your future and everything you're trying to accomplish is as easy and joyful as possible.
That's so good. Both of you, thank you for being here. And folks, again, wintoday.tv/episode 306. I'm going to put links in the show notes on how to connect with both Anthony and Stacy and get a copy of the book. You can watch the episode there as well. But both of you, thank you so much for being here today, and just very grateful for your vulnerability and then the wisdom you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.